I will.
Debate is an important element of progress. Welcome to Evening Reports, A View from Afar. And as always, we are joined by political scientist Paul Buchanan to discuss how Trump told Bob Woodward he intentionally held back how deadly COVID-19 was. We consider how damaging will Woodward's book Rage be for this presidential campaign. And how effective is Trump's culture wars, race-baiting tactic versus Joe Biden's conservative positioning strategy? And what's behind Trump's attack on the US military leadership? Is this wedge strategy damaging for him? But first, here's an invitation to those of you who are joining us live. If you are joining us via Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, feel free to make comments, and if you do, we'll be able to include these in the program. So let's cross to Paul for a deep dive into the US presidential campaign issues. Good afternoon, Paul.
Hi, Selwyn. Nice to be back.
Nice to be with you again. Now, with this absolute bombshell that has hit the United States news at the moment, with the Bob Woodward of Watergate fame, of course, launching his book. In part, he has underscored and highlighted that during the 9 hours of interviews with President Donald Trump, that Trump actually, said to him that he actually misled, this is a paraphrase, but misled the American people on how deadly the COVID-19 virus was. And this was back in February, of course, before it really kicked in, and at a time when the Trump presidency and administration could have done a lot more about it, perhaps.
I think he just might get away with it. He being Trump, saying that the reason that he misled the American public was that he wanted to avoid a panic. He wanted to avoid panic in the streets, and he wanted to avoid panic on Wall Street. And if he sticks to that line, and there aren't further admissions on those tapes that Woodward has, then it's very, very likely that he's going to skate. Many people say, well, Woodward works for the Washington Post. He's part of the liberal establishment. He's out to get Trump. He dropped this book in mid-campaign, and they'll discount it. And I think in Trump's mind, not that I want to give the guy a lot of credit, but I think that in his mind, he was acting presidential by not panicking. I mean, assuming that there's any honesty at all in the comment about not wanting people to panic, that, he may believe that he was doing the better thing and buying time for his scientists.
Right.
Because he didn't understand the nature of the epidemic.
Let's just on that then, let's just scope that out. Is it fair and reasonable for a leader on such a huge issue as this, of which he's fully aware of, to actually do that, to actually hold back on the realities of it? Is it fair and reasonable?
No. I mean, look, there are many, many times when leaders, times of warfare, intelligence matters, where unfortunately they have to obfuscate, they even have to mislead the public because there are very serious national issues at stake. But this was not one of them. This was a public health disaster in the making. He knew it. And quite frankly, it shows a fundamental lack of understanding of the nature of pandemics, the nature of contagion. Because had he acted early, whatever panic occurred in the streets and on Wall Street would have abated, because earlier preventative measures or palliative measures would have been in place much earlier than they eventually were put into place. And I would reckon that we wouldn't have the death rate, the case or death rate. For example, if testing had become had occurred immediately in February and March. But
so are you picking up a certain amount of tolerance within the American voter's mind, where they think a leader will be a leader. We don't need to know even things that are this big, that they may vote accordingly and vote for Trump on an issue such as COVID.
Very good point, because I think there is a widespread sentiment that in the United States, but also elsewhere, where people allow their leaders to lead or think that that's why they've been elected into office. But also remember that to Trump's core base, he is their shepherd. He can do no wrong, and so whatever his motivations, and certainly his explanations today, will resonate with them. So I don't think that the book Rage is going to have a significant impact on the electoral outcome. It may strip away some voters in the red states that are now deeply affected by the coronavirus.
Yeah.
That's the key here.
Yeah.
Is that the bulk of infections has now moved into the Trump heartland. The Dakotas, Tennessee, Oklahoma still remains, Iowa. They're all deeply red states. And if people are getting sick and dying in large numbers, maybe the revelations in this book will turn some of them against Trump. Now, let's be clear what Trump is doing, though.
Yeah.
He's walking away from the pandemic response, arguing that it's now up to state leaders to take the initiative. So he just wants to get away from this thing. And the fact that this is a reminder to the public, both pro and con, him as president, may have an impact on the margins. But I think when it comes to the core voting sentiments, one way or another, it's probably going to have less of an impact than anticipated.
Well, this will be played, obviously, for quite a lot this week in the United States. But just let's have a look at this interchange between Bob Woodward and Donald Trump in these interviews. Remember that these are the interviews that apparently there's 9 hours of this stuff. And this is what's been released right at the moment. So here we go with this.
Through air, Bob, that's always tougher than the touch. The touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. This is more deadly. This is 5 per... this is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff. Well,
so
I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you,
sure, I want you to.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic.
Right. So there's a bit more over here as well, where he picks it up.
Deadly.
But anyway, that was the CBS News actually running that earlier this morning, New Zealand time, and of course into the evening US time. So, do you think, in listening to that footage there of what Trump was saying to Bob Woodward, do you feel it's damaging more than a president protecting his public and not wanting to, from the details and the damage of this particular virus, giving his scientists time and potentially not causing a panic?
Well, I mean, those words are clear. In normal times, those words would be incredibly damning. The fact that he ridiculed people with masks, said that masks were politically correct and that sort of thing. I mean, if you juxtapose those words that we've just heard with the countless times where he minimized the risk of the virus, ridiculed people who took preventative measures such as social distancing, such as the use of masks, then yes, it could hurt him. But these are not normal times. And here's the evil genius, if you will, in a lot of what Trump does. Every day there is a scandal. Every day there is some outrage. And the cumulative effect of daily doses of scandal and outrage is that people begin to forget, what came first. And so we've run 6 months plus of this pandemic. And, now it's clear that he was lying all along. But I think people don't quite realize the extent to which he is responsible through his lies for the infection and deaths of thousands of people. See, for him to get hurt electorally, he has to be tied personally to the human suffering that has been caused by the U.S.'s dysfunctional response, which lays on his desk. And I'm not entirely sure that they're going to be able to do that, but I will say this. The Lincoln Project and other anti-Trump advertising campaigns is going to find in Woodward's tapes an absolute goldmine of material to put up between now and November 3rd.
Any time that President Trump, for example, ridiculed anybody that was suffering or blamed it on somebody else, during that time where people were waking up to how serious this particular thing was, every time he positioned and advanced the arguments relating to economy first, can be juxtapositioned perhaps to what he already knew, as exposed by this particular video exchange between Bob Woodward and myself in February.
No, and absolutely. When you think about that, you may recall that in the Rose Garden, before Melania destroyed the Rose Garden a couple of weeks ago.
It looks quite stark, doesn't it?
Yeah. Eastern European modernism.
Apparently.
But he was in the Rose Garden in April, I believe it was, and said he took no responsibility for the response. Now, that was, outrageous on the face of it, but in light of the fact that he knew all along, you could say, well, he was an ignoramus, and he thinks the scientists should have, taken responsibility. But now we know that, he, in fact, had been fully briefed over what the negative potential of this pandemic was, and he decided to go with the non-panic argument, if that is true.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that sometimes he lies. Even he doesn't know he's lying. He's telling Woodward he wanted to avoid a panic. Who knows what was going through his head on February 7th?
He felt comfortable, obviously, for 9 hours, committing 9 hours to Bob Woodward. I mean, of course, Bob Woodward is a star, isn't he, in some circles, in many circles. And so perhaps just watching Trump in different scenarios, perhaps he thought he would be able to out-intellectualize Woodward, and that this was his avenue to greatness, that other presidents had worked quite cooperatively with the man relating to other books outside of the Watergate books, of course. But look, Paul, let's go to a transition, and we'll come back with this: how effective will Trump's culture wars and race-baiting tactics be versus Joe Biden's conservative positioning strategy? It'd be really interesting to hear your take on that. Be right back. So, welcome back, Paul, and people. The culture wars and race-baiting tactics that Trump has advanced, particularly in the last few weeks, as once again the Black Lives Matter movement is highly relevant, obviously, in the culture areas, but also he's tagged it to the law and order and the breakdown of law and order, placing the responsibility for that on those that are protesting for their basic rights, and also the governors, if the governors and mayors, etc., are Democrats. It seems so polarised. How effective is that versus Joe Biden's, conservative approach? It's almost like he's playing in some ways to Trump's definitions of him as slow Joe.
That for people like me is the worrisome part. I'll leave the Democratic side of the equation for the second part of this discussion. The Trump campaign strategy is obvious. He promised to make America great again. You can ask yourself, is it great? Is it doing well?
Great for who?
But even for people who have supported Trump all along, yes, there are some economic opportunists who have done very well, thanks to his deregulation and all of those sort of things, his tax breaks for up and income earners. But the vast majority of Americans haven't seen a discernible improvement in their lives. And the U.S. is nowhere close to greatness at this point. It's divided, quite frankly, to my mind, divided in a way that we haven't seen since the Civil War.
And it's almost a strange thing that Donald Trump, fighting for the second go at his presidency, is kind of saying the same things as he did coming in 4 years ago, that we're going to make America great. You know, it's almost like an acknowledgement, his pitch, that America is not how he would have wished it to be, but let's make it, you know, this glorious dream. Does that work with his base, and most importantly, outside his voter base? Does that actually gel there, that he's the man to actually fix this, even though it seems to have deteriorated under his leadership?
Well, it certainly resonates with his base. Let me explain how I think this is played. The only thing that he could do, given these videotape murders of unarmed black men, now not just George Floyd, but numerous instances of police brutality, he had to double down on Steve Bannon's original culture war strategy. Now, Bannon's out of the picture. Yeah. But a guy called Stephen Miller is his lead domestic advisor. Miller, unfortunately, has overt neo-Nazi sympathies. This is no surprise to anybody who follows politics in the States, so I'm not defaming him. But the fact is that he's decided that he's going to go full-on, forget dog whistling to the races. He's now going full-on megaphone. And instead of thinking about police brutality and systemic and institutionalized racism within the police ranks and society, remember we have that whole argument about Confederate monuments and stuff, he's doubling down and fear-mongering to white people, ignorant white people, to be honest with you. And the subtext is these uppity African Americans and others of color are coming to burn your house down. They're coming to get you. And if you're female, they can get you in many unpleasant ways. It's that crass. And the truth of the matter is although there has been nationwide protests against systemic racism and the like, police brutality and the sort, the fact is the cities are not burning. The violent protests are the minority of the protests, and where they do occur, they occur in very limited geographic spaces, even in Portland, Oregon, which has had 100-plus days of peaceful protests and then the occasional police riot.
So, Trump's allegations there relating to Portland was that the Democrats basically, they couldn't address it, that this was getting out of hand because their leadership was poor. He encourages, those from outside to come in, under his control, etc., and to sort that out, to protect, if I understand it, the federal infrastructure. Was there something to that? Was he exploiting an opportunity as opposed to dog whistling something up?
Well, the thing is, again, there's a lot of evil genius involved here, because the idea is this. He hasn't been able to make America great because the Democrats are preventing him from doing so. That it's the Democrats' fault. And when he refers to Democrat-governed cities, what he's referring to in the main are cities that are predominantly African-American, because African-Americans tend to vote Democratic, urban African-Americans in particular. So that's a dog whistle right there.
Right, because he was talking up Chicago, South Chicago, and he was talking up Detroit for a time too, wasn't he?
He certainly was, and that wasn't even veiled. Now, Portland is a majority white city. Yeah. But it's nominally
quite very liberal. Yeah, liberal, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but the police in Portland are not liberal.
Right.
It's well known that the Portland police have been infiltrated by white supremacists, and there is a significant white supremacist presence in Oregon, particularly in eastern Oregon, who regularly gravitate to Portland in order to demonstrate their strength. So it's an anomaly in the sense that it's not majority African American in terms of its population, but it's run by Democrats who, quite frankly, are being held hostage by the police union and has a police force with a very checkered record when it comes to race relations and actually looking the other way when white supremacists do their bit on the streets. So you know, he blames the Democrats for all that's wrong domestically.
Right.
And that resonates with people, for example, who do not live in these big metropolitan areas. You know, people, they will go onto right-wing media. They'll see the selected videos of burning in the streets and, you know, cars burning and dumpsters burning, and they will assume that that's the entire city is up in flames when in fact
that's how it's framed. Yeah. And also, you know, news media, we will always follow where the action is.
Exactly.
And it can give the appearance, can't it, of something that is absolutely in chaos. That's not to say that things are absolutely terribly disjointed. They're chaotic at best, especially when you're looking from afar here. I suppose we fall into the same trap potentially. But there is a sense that the United States is in disarray more than perhaps it's been since the civil unrest and the claims for civil rights in the 1960s. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, like I say, I think that this has now moved beyond the race riots of the 1960s. But let's take the broader picture. The key to success in an election, or one key, is to determine the narrative surrounding it. And so right now we have a contestation between the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign on who is going to dominate the narrative.
Who is going to define each other? And you can see that juxtapositioning. So let's look at that with Joe Biden. I mean, Trump has long defined him as Sleepy Joe or Slow Joe, all of this kind of thing. You see Joe Biden coming through with his campaign, and once again, looking at that from afar, it seems like it's his move to look like the stabilizing force, to be the elder leader here that is not going to be sidetracked or erratic. He's going to be stable. He's going to be centrist. He's not going to scare the horses. He's going to pull the United States back to where arguably it once was, perhaps under, you know, the Obama administration, if that's fair. But has he allowed Trump to define him in negative ways?
I think in part he has. I think that Trump, I won't say is winning the narrative in terms of portraying Biden as being generally soft, and particularly soft on crime and law and order issues. But I say that because Biden is responding within that narrative. He's come out and said, you know, looting is not protesting, burning is not protesting, I don't like looters. You know, he's now talking Trump's language. Instead of saying you're exaggerating the amount of violence on the streets and you're minimizing the fact that these people have a legitimate reason to be in the streets.
So the latter part is the strength of that response. The first part, he could open up himself to saying, oh, he's deluding himself. He doesn't know how bad these things are. And they, once again, you know, opens it up for the Trump camp to come back and say that's all happening in the Democratic states. But also, is it true too that Biden seems to be following Trump? Like Trump goes up to the problem areas, for example, like last week. Next thing you know, Biden's there too a few days later. What's the purpose in that?
Well, I think there's some short-sighted thinking going on in his campaign and within the Democratic National Committee, which gets to the bigger issues involved. But the reason he felt compelled to follow Trump is that Trump went up and he basically huddled with Republican officials. He didn't get out and meet and greet the people because they didn't want him there. In fact, the mayor of Kenosha didn't want him there. So the idea, I assume, is that Biden goes up and he's welcomed by the people who are protesting. It's a stark contrast to Trump surrounded by security agents and the like. The trouble is, you just pointed out, he seems to be following Trump around, which means he's buying in to the idea that he appears to be soft when it comes to law and order. Now, let's be very clear on this. The Republicans are throwing everything against the wall and to see if it sticks on Biden. He's a communist. He's a socialist. He's a closet Bernie bro. They throw stuff at Kamala Harris. What did he say 2 days ago? He is not Trump. That's the default position. I am not the other guy. And as you said, I am rational. I'm an experienced pair of hands. I don't do crazy things, and I don't say crazy things, and I don't govern by a tweet. So I'm the non-Trump. Okay, that's fine. That'll get you a certain, that'll get you some way.
Yeah.
But then he
anybody but Trump type of voter.
Yeah, and he'll be able to form alliances with Republicans who are not happy with the Trump takeover of their party
for a one-vote move. Yeah.
Yeah, but he's playing once again to the center.
Yeah.
But in this instance, it's safe pair of hands, non-Trump. Then he's playing he's going for the new demographic. So he's doing identity politics. But this one is more rational because the future of the United States demographically is brown.
Yeah.
Brown and female.
So,
so that's, he wants to play to that angle. But then he undermines that play by talking about being a unifier and going centrist. Now, here's the problem. And I'm being a bit of a contrarian here. And again, we are seeing things from afar. There is no center in the United States anymore. There's nothing to unify. The fact is that the younger generation of voters never were exposed, that is under 30 years old, were never exposed to the Soviet Union or communism. They don't have the fear of socialism that their parents have. The fact is that the U.S. remains a class-based society. The one percenters now control something like 65% of the wealth in the United States, and the bottom 20% get less than 1% of the GDP share, something to that effect. And so, by going into the center or trying to play to the center, think about who he's playing for.
Yeah.
Liberal Republicans.
So a couple of things that stand out to me on that is that the progressive base was very energized in the primaries, yeah? And so, so if he plays too much the conservative centrist card, like what you're picking up here and your concerns are, does he risk not alienating, but basically rendering the whole progressive side of the democratic movement is irrelevant in this campaign, and that they may not get out there to energize those to come out to vote, for example? Is that a danger? And also what comes to mind here is one of the things like is coming through from Nat Silver's team at I'll bring it up on screen actually, 538.com, and I'll just bring that up here. What they're talking about, that if Biden loses the hold of the lead that he's got, that if he goes down from, around the 7 and above 7, down around 5, particularly after the debates, then he's getting into dangerous territory, that one cannot assume that he's going to win. And that the Trump camp is looking for that leverage to give itself the ability to have enough things that during debate it can actually launch a bit of a lift where Biden perhaps potentially could go under 5. And then their percentages start stacking against him when you consider, we're talking about the national popular vote here, but what they're saying is anything below 5, it starts getting dangerous for Biden in the national tally there, because the Electoral College then starts to actually come into play where it is providing opportunities for Trump to actually win. If it's around the 7, apparently it's like 90%, 98% even on a win for Biden. But if it gets down to 3, no, the percentages are very slim indeed.
Right. I mean, I'm not an expert on American domestic politics, but I can tell you this: anything under 10% spread would have me worried if I was a Democratic strategist, because again, the Electoral College comes into play. There's been now a fairly thorough history of gerrymandering in favor of Republicans and the like, and so I would hope that Biden was a little further ahead come first days of November. But it'll remain to be seen if he understands that using the same logic as 2016 is basically going on a hiding to nothing. In 2016, progressive Democrats were told, we need to defeat Trump. We need a safe pair of hands. Hillary Clinton is the safest pair of hands that you can imagine. Put aside your radical claims, radical as being maybe universal health care and that sort of thing. And then when we win, we'll address those issues. That's exactly what's going on now.
Yeah.
Biden, which is...
Although Biden's slightly ahead compared to where Clinton was. Yeah.
Yeah, he is, but we're falling into the same trap, and you outlined it very well. The progressive side of the Democratic Party has once again been told that they got to bide their time, be super pragmatic, and vote a centrist in because this is not the time to introduce radical agendas. Trump is too dangerous.
So when is the time? I guess that's the impatience creeps in, doesn't it?
And then what happens is, in 2016, Trump actually won, so everything was reversed. But we have to remember that Biden is a corporate Democrat. He's basically Clintonite, and if he turns his back on Bernie supporters, Elizabeth Warren supporters, the Gang of Four supporters, again, and that Gang of Four are women of color, progressive women of color. If he turns his back on them, he's turning his back on the most mobilized and activist part of his party.
Yeah, and you need that. You need them to turn out. You need those to get your reach into every sector of society beyond your comfortable zone, yeah?
And not only that, but opinion polls have shown that if you strip it of any political language, the majority of Americans want universal health care. They want education debt relief. Educational debt is a big problem.
Yeah, particularly in times like this. Obviously health is huge, isn't it? So some sort of ability to be able to universally access that if you're sick would be a fundamental. And then the economics coming out of that is
exactly. You would think right now, in
education's
the
the way.
If you lose your job, you lose your insurance, you're done. You're at the mercy of the pandemic.
Yeah.
This is the time to introduce the idea that, it's a basic citizenship right.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. And yet...
coming from New Zealand, Paul, it's a given. Free healthcare, free education, etc., etc. There's costs relating to postgraduate and also the second and third year in university, but everything else is free.
Oh.
So, the idea of somebody not being able to access healthcare when they've got COVID-19 is actually abhorrent from many.
Think of it this way, and this is for our American viewers, because I'm an expat, an American. Until I got my citizenship here, I was eligible for all health benefits as a permanent of this country. So in New Zealand, it's not even considered a citizenship right. It is a human right to have free public health care. And quite frankly, having been through the public health system, it's very good. This idea that, it's crummy.
It takes commitment and priority setting.
I just think that Biden needs to accept there is no center anymore, that many Americans actually support progressive, quote unquote, policies when it comes to certain basics like health care and debt relief, and that if he continues to play towards the center, he's playing into Trump's hand, because we'll have to also remember that the Republicans play dirty. See, the Democrats always want to have the moral high ground. They always want to have a clean pair of gloves when they, finish the electoral fight. The Republicans went feral a long time ago, back in the days of Newt Gingrich and whatnot. They're here to win. They don't care how they win. They want to win, and they will win, so long as the Democrats continue to play, with the gentleman's rules that seems to still hold sway within the hierarchy of the Democratic National Committee.
Really?
You don't have to play dirty, but you play hard.
Yeah.
And the way to play hard is to go at these basic rights and say, we will champion them.
And
in
that
the face.
and that's where the primaries were quite successful in highlighting a basically policy that was solution based, based on where are things gone wrong, where is the need, here are the solutions, and in some ways that's not even access stuff, is it? It's just the basics. Now let's take a transition, and very quickly we'll give people a taster perhaps of next week's program, where we will look into Trump's attack on the US military leadership. Is this a wedge strategy that is damaging him? And also there is other stuff too that is leaked out into the public arena. Clearly the US military is peeved, to say the least, that Donald Trump actually leaked out classified security information about new nukes, the new nuke platforms, etc., etc. So we'll go into that in more depth, as I understand it, next week. But here, just getting back to the point, we'll come back with is Donald Trump's positioning, is juxtapositioning to try and split off the US military brass and its leadership from its rank and file. Is it successful, or is it going to backfire? So Paul, welcome back here. So just picking up on that, where is Trump going with this? Does he really want to create chaos within the United States military? It's obviously one of its strongest institutions. Would anyone really want to start picking at the fabric of it?
I think what he's doing, assuming that there's any rationality here, is he's going after security conservatives who have turned on him. So the foil is the military leadership that he's attacking directly. But the real target are basically Republican security conservatives, neocons in the first instance, who have abandoned him if they ever did support him. Now, I'm not entirely sure there's rationality here. I think what happened was the reports, of course, came out in the Atlantic article that he had disparaged the war dead, veterans, and soldiers in general.
Yeah, and this is big news in the States, isn't it? Big news.
Yeah, right. And and in the United States, see, we in New Zealand, we are not a militaristic society.
Yeah.
So we don't reify our military here. The United States, the military is sacrosanct. The military is is above reproach. I happen to think the U.S. is a little too militaristic in its approach to all aspects of life, but it is what it is.
And look, in some ways, we get it from down here. We understand that it's played, when it plays it right, from our point of view, the world order can kind of adjust in a more favourable, progressive way. We also understand, that it's at its fabrics, in its history. It got rid of the English and its totalitarian type of approach all those centuries ago in the United States. And you've got to applaud what the United States did all of those centuries ago. So we understand all of that. But I just can't get into my head, why is Trump? Is this a personal vendetta against the brass where he thinks they've walked out on me, so I'm going to absolutely do them over here?
Well, that's why I don't know if there was a broader rationale, although he did say one thing that's interesting. I'll bring that up in a second. I think that when he saw that the quotes, he realized who probably spoke to the reporter for the Atlantic, John Allen in particular.
Right.
And he couldn't get beyond that. So he decided to attack these generals and retired generals who he thought were likely sources for that story.
And we had Colin Powell and others coming out very strongly, didn't we? Saying they're not going to vote for him. They're going to vote for Biden. Yeah.
Exactly. And of course, after that photo op outside the church where federal troops were used, the Joint Chief of Staff was deeply embarrassed by being used as a prop.
As you would. And also there's this line of information where it's just interesting to see what your take was on it. Where
let me just tell you about the wedge.
Right, yeah.
The in any type of regime, authoritarian or democratic, it is extremely dangerous to try to separate the military leadership from the troops, to drive an ideological wedge between the commanders and those who receive orders. That is exceedingly dangerous. In authoritarian regimes, it is the stuff of coups. A president who does such a thing will be removed by force.
So you're picking up exactly where my question was going. I was interested to see what you thought of the military brass basically seeding it out there into the media and to the public sphere in the United States, that they had considered an alternative course here relating to his leadership. What's that about?
Well, I mean, the military at their heart of hearts are constitutionalists. And he's been putting them into, really serious predicaments with his behavior. And now I find one thing very interesting. And again, this is a dangerous game to be playing. You're inciting basically rebellion in the ranks.
Yeah.
That's essentially the ultimate outcome.
And is this why they say he's dangerous? This is what's coming out, that this guy, this president, he's dangerous.
He clearly is. But there was an interesting kernel of truth in all of the weirdness surrounding the military brass. And I don't think he quite thought of it. But it goes as following. He made the accusation that the military brass likes to go to war to keep the military-industrial complex happy. That is, the profits of these companies are what motivate generals to put people in harm's way. Now, I can tell you, as a former Pentagon official, that's not how generals think. Okay, they're trying to avoid war as much as possible. So it was ludicrous on the face of it. However, if Trump was more reflective, and what he was pointing to was that the military-industrial complex is a significant part of the U.S. economy, that the U.S. is a warmongering society that continually picks fights with others, that in turn feeds the weapon industry that supplies it. If he was going to do that sort of deeper critique, we'd have to pause and go, the generals may not go fight, so crudely for the weapons industry, but on the other hand, there is, as Dwight Eisenhower identified, a military-industrial complex that is at the center of the U.S. economy. And maybe we want to reflect upon our endless wars and whether it's related to the fact that there is a war machine, an economic machine, that is sustained by warfare. Now, that's a little too deep for Donald Trump. I don't think he was going there. But that, I thought, was an interesting thing to say because it goes to the economic nationalists. It goes to the small business people. They're seeing these big corporations benefit through war. It goes to the isolationists that he's trying to court, the Pat Buchanan crowd. Who don't want to see us overseas. And so even though I don't think he did a deep reflection on the nature of the U.S. economy and its relationship to constant warmongering, I do think that there was a little kernel in there that could open the debate even further if particularly the Democrats were able to take advantage of it. But you may see that all the response from the Democrats was, he's talking bad about our troops. He said bad things about John McCain. I think they should have elevated it to a broader critique of Republican connections to the very military-industrial complex that Trump was talking about.
In closing, let's wrap this up and we'll pick up threads of this next week for sure. The military allowing that idea that they had worked out a potential consequence for Donald Trump's leadership. What does that say about how dangerous the guy was from their eyes? And also, was that a reality that they could put in place that in some ways could be interpreted from within the United States and outside as some sort of military maneuver that removes an elected president of the United States?
No, I think it was going in a different way. I don't think that he's going to be removed.
No. Certainly not this close to an election. But why would they put that out? To allow that kind of, idea to breed?
Well, I think what they're trying to do is avoid an October surprise. See, right now, in the measure that Trump is getting desperate, because he knows the real polls have him lagging behind and actually not really picking up ground. The military understands this man is so craven that he could well launch some foreign misadventure.
Okay. Yeah.
And they're preempting him and saying, we're not doing it.
Right.
You can
it's more in that way.
Now, here's the thing.
They take his power away from him as opposed to replacing it.
Just ignore his orders. But let's think of it this way. And I'm far from being a conspiracy theorist. But let's imagine that Trump and Putin have a conversation. And then Putin orders his troops to pull a stunt like the stunt in Syria, but with more severe repercussions. Let's say Americans die in a Russian airstrike inside northern Iraq, not just Syria, but so something outrageous. What are the military brass going to do? They have to respond. Trump turns around and goes, oh, Russians killed our boys. You got to get in there and kick some rear end. Now they're in a predicament because they have pretty much signaled they're not going to listen to his orders if he tries to do some foreign adventure. But if the U.S. is attacked, that somehow there's collusion and fomenting an October surprise, but it gives all the appearance of being done spontaneously by a hostile actor, then they do have to respond. And if they do, that plays into his hands. So even with that shot across the bow, if you will, by the military to Trump saying, don't try it, he has ways to force them to do his bidding against their will.
Right. Well, on that point, Paul, let's wrap this up. And we'll be back again this time next week. Thank you for those who have watched live and also for those that watch it on demand, A View from Afar. Thank you, Paul. And until next week, take care.